Hello, everyone. Here with the Wandering Sword. My name's Spencer,
I'm Kyle.
Doug?
and we have a special guest today. We have the president of the HAMA Association, Da'Mon Stith. He's been a good friend of mine. I've got a chance to meet him in the HAMA the Gathering in Austin, Texas last year before COVID and everything blew up. It's been amazing to learn a little bit more about him. He's been doing martial arts for such a long time, and I feel like a kindred soul. But we're going to go ahead and kick it out with a question that I think I've always wanted to ask you, but I never had a chance to. So the fact that we both started Swordplay and everything from little age, what is your favorite thing that drew you to Swordplay?
So that's a tough
Juicy.
question. Yeah, it is. I mean, so you have like the soul and the spirit of the warrior kind of crystallized and epitomized in this one like instrument, right? So it doesn't matter where you go, and we know as fighters, swords are great, but if you see somebody with some spears and you got an open field, you pretty much know what time it is with the spears. Like the spears are gonna mop you up, right? But
Yep.
there's something about the sword, even in cultures that didn't use the sword as actively on the battlefield, but they use these implements as symbols of power and of strength, and I think that for me it was all the mystery that was associated with the weapon. Apart from being a kid, and it's like so all my inside joke. So all my understanding of love is based off of 80s sword and sorcerer movies. You know what I'm saying? So it's like you have the hero that rides in the battle, for the love of his life, and he goes against insurmountable odds, and it's like it's him and the sword, and so it's all those ideas of like being able to stand against tyranny and oppression, to be, for your soul and your spirit to be a reflection of that weapon, the weapon that's been heated and beaten into its current form, and it kind of symbolizes our training, our trials and tribulations, our victories and our triumphs, all in that action. And I think, that's just kind of like the mystery of the weapon. It's also the mystery of how the weapons are made. If you think about traditional swordsmiths, traditional blacksmith, in Africa, a blacksmith was seen as on a mystical level. If you think about it, because the blacksmith gathered all these recognizable elements, earth, fire, wind, water, and they put this all together, and then what you came up with was implements that would help advance life, whether that is for hunting, warfare, or agriculture. And I think the sword epitomizes what that process is, more so than any other weapons, I think.
Very cool. No, I like
That's
that.
an awesome answer.
And it's so encompassing. I think it's honestly the heart and soul of what the Wandering Sword focuses on as far as the wonder and the mysteriousness of the sword. That's cool.
There's so many cultures that have that. The Joseph Campbell monomyth, like the story of the hero rising up and the sword being an intrinsic part of that. Yeah, man, you get it, dude.
Kindred souls. It's so cool.
All right, so our next follow-up question to that is your personal gym or guild is the Guild of the Silent Sword. So what led you to ultimately want to create a private club like that?
Gosh, it really was necessity. Our circumstances here and the circumstances with like reconstructing and even researching like, African swordsmanship or African martial arts. I mean, it's a very difficult task to do. And to do it, you need a community. I needed a community to like take my like crazy ideas, and I needed like guinea pigs to like field test this stuff and to try it out and to, really seriously.
No, it's true. It's so true.
Yeah. It's one thing for it to be me, and it working for me, but it's another thing to see how it works for other people. So I created the Guild of the Silent Sword just out of the need and the necessity of a community to kind of help further this movement.
Very cool. Very cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, super fascinating. I think something that would be helpful to our viewers too is tell us about some of the weapons that were used in traditional African martial arts.
There is a type of double-edged broadsword that is common in West Africa. It's called a takoba. It's popularized by the Tuareg, but it's a sword style that you'll find that's used amongst the Tuareg, Fulani, the Hausa, the Nupe. It's just a widespread weapon. So the takoba is one of those iconic West African swords. But if you look at it, if you don't see it with inside of its scabbard, you may just confuse it for like a European arming sword, right? So then moving to the Central Sahara and into East Africa, you have the cousin version of the takoba, which in some parts is called, and amongst collectors, is called a kaskara, which is the Kanuri term for the long. Now they're broadswords or arming swords in a sense. They're long bladed. So the takoba has more of a triangular shaped blade. It kind of comes to not fine point, but it has like a rounded tip. But the angles of the blade kind of comes more to a triangle. Whereas kaskara, the blade runs more parallel. It's usually a lot longer, and the point it doesn't round off. It comes to more of an actual point. The crossguard is also usually made out of uncovered metal, and it has these pieces that you'll find like on Turkish Ottoman style swords. I don't know what the name of it. Sounds silly saying this. A lot of shamshirs have that it has a cross, and then it has that portion that kind of helps the blade sit better inside the scabbard. So kaskaras, they're also called saif. It's just a general Arabic term for sword. Saifs that style sword is really common in Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea. In Somalia, they have that style of sword, but they also have another sword called a Belawi. And it's a really interesting looking short sword with a clip point. And they range. So a lot of times, some of these things that are swords, or these weapons, they'll have a variant size, right? So they'll kind of they'll range like, to knife size or the size of a short sword. So the Somali use of the Malawi sword is really, really common. Now, since we're in East Africa, one of the most iconic weapons in East Africa would be Abyssinian Shotel. It's crazy times. The Shotel is
cool though. They're so cool.
The Shotel is one of those weapons that comes in various lengths and various degrees of curvature. So you have some that are almost extremely sickle shaped, and then you find the blade starts to relax more into what is more like a yataga, like almost like a Turkish yataga in the sense where it recurves back, but it has like a very shallow curve. So you have those swords in Ethiopia, and then you also have the saif, similar to the kaskara, and then you have the Guradi. The Guradi is a saber, and it usually kind of features this similar like rhino style of like either horn handle, so it makes like a really large pommel with either a coin or a piece of metal at the bottom. And it flares out to the bottom quite a bit, and then it doesn't really have a crossguard per se. Moving back to Northwest Africa, a really interesting sword type they have is called a flissa in Algeria, and it looks like if you were to take a long leaf-shaped blade and split it straight down the middle, you kind of get the shape of the flissa. So it has this belly towards the tip, and it flares out, and then it tapers down a bit, and then it comes to a triangular point. Again, this weapon has many variations to like It can be like kind of short and stout, like a chopping sword, or it can taper out really, really long and have a very, very accentuated point where, it was theorized it was used for piercing mail. But, those are just kind of, we don't really know for certain.
Sure. You also think about the Egyptian Khopesh being the axe wise. What about that? Can you tell us a little bit more too?
Well, so then we're skipping, like, going back time, way back. So, the Khopesh. It's kind of like the more I learn, the less I know.
Sure.
Is my situation. So, there's a real common theory that the Khopesh descends from the Epsilon Axe. Epsilon Axe, that slashing axe that the Egyptians were using in the Middle Kingdom, right? So there are a few problems with that theory, and like kind of like on the surface, it kind of makes sense. Like you can look at it and say, "Oh, okay, I can see how this is, very much almost like that axe, except it's made out of all metal, basically, But when we look at it from the tactical perspective, like why did the Egyptians use the Epsilon Axe? Well, they used the Epsilon Axe, which is a slashing axe, because they were fighting against armies that were lightly armored, right? The armor turns away the cuts better than it does, I guess, the piercing, penetrating. You guys know from fighting in armor, when we're talking about crushing blows, percussive blows, that will tend to be more effective against armor than like a glancing, slashing cut. So
absolutely.
So then the question is this: so why would the Egyptians equip their army, their New Kingdom army? Because that's what happened in the New Kingdom, is that armor technology got better, bows were better, and then you were dealing with cavalry, and those were the things, or cavalry in the form of chariots, or chariotry, or chariot, whatever. So why would the Egyptians go from using a slashing axe to using a slashing sword for their infantry if they had already, if armor techniques had improved and they were actually looking more for penetrative force than cutting force? The Khopesh and Epsilon Axe would have functioned in the same way on the battlefield, with the only exception that the Khopesh would be possibly more secure because of it being a single piece of metal. So when we start looking at it like that, because that axe gave way to the duck-bill penetrative axe. Now, a couple of theories or ideas out there is, one, we don't know for certain if the Khopesh was used by infantry. It may have been a situation that it was used primarily from by the cavalry and from an elevated position from the chariots. Which, if we're riding in the battle, and all of a sudden me slashing down with the Khopesh onto these unprotected areas from behind the shield and stuff, makes more sense than us being right here on each other and then me trying to get my cuts off when I could just use my axe. So I don't ever want to say that we're going to know, because Egyptologists don't know for certain, and so if they don't know for certain, we don't know for certain. We know what information that their field research gives us, and sometimes they're not even looking at it in terms of the battlefield. They're like, they collect this information, and there's not even so much about the battlefield, but it just kind of like on the side, it kind of informs us about the fight.
Yeah, it's more about the weapon and seeing what things it would be used for, and then it gets into conjecture. We get into sword theory. What transcripts, like in HAMA, there's 133, there's all these other things, but in HAMA, we have to look at Egyptologists and we're like, okay, they probably used it this way, and now we're just saying, all right, here we go. And I know we've talked about this back and forth, and I'm like, how are you on your writing wise? What other books can we look at? What other things can tell us that?
Oh man, this is where I get to be like and say stuff like you look within or are deep within
Thank you, Yoda. Yes, good that is.
That's where I can give you an answer and not really answer anything. The truth of the matter is we're kind of in this really weird spot with HAMA. Whereas HEMA has like the text to draw from, right? They can draw from these actual fight books. And then you have on the other side of that, you have groups like some of the Dark Age, like Irish and Viking Age, like Reconstruction groups. And they have to rely on experimental archaeology. They have to rely on a lot of other contextual stuff in order to kind of get an idea about how they could have possibly fought. And they're looking at a lot of different things. So HAMA is kind of straddling the fence in that sense, right? So on one hand, we don't have any like fight books per se. I mean, we're working on translating some of these Mamluk manuals. And so we have to understand that, going back to the earlier question about how far advanced or how different would have been the Moroccan army versus the Songhai/Hausa army if they were talking about, close quarters fighting. They probably wouldn't have been that different in the sense that they had they had access to classical Islamic style military theory, right? Like I said, the Songhai army arranged itself in classical Islamic style armies. Now there are local variations as to how they applied that, but so we're looking at Islamic battle theory and as being kind of disseminated across Islamic influenced Africa. So that includes Morocco. It also includes Mali and Songhai, Hausa states, and whatever else. So that is one thread that we have, that we can look at what's written in Islamic Africa and in the Islamic world to give us at least a framework of possibilities as to what kind of information the elites would have had access to. So we have that, right? At the same time, we can't completely and wholly rely on that because we have to adjust that based off of the different cultural lenses. So in that case, what will help us out is, so we have that information to give us a framework for Islamically influenced Africa. So at the same time, like places like Benin, where we have the Islamic influence was very, very minimal to non-existent, we go by, their artwork, what I'm saying, their depiction of their warriors to get an idea about the weapons. So the cool thing about training with the weapons is that the weapon, I'm a firm believer. So you take away the martial artists out of you, right? You take away the karate, Kali, Eskrima guy, take that out. And then you look at the weapon and you look at the defensive equipment that they would have worn. And then, so from there, as and tapping into that primeval tool using
just like
our chimpanzee brain, the fact that
taking
we're
this
chimps,
thing,
we're trying to take our tools and elevate ourselves,
and then you're just trying to use this to get the other person, like just as simple as from this to that. How do I do?
Right. So then with weapons that are real specialized, and I'll like
grab something. You got time. We're like, so
I mean, it's a cardboard cutout. There's nothing.
That's fancy. All right. It's conceptual. We'll use our imagination.
So you take a weapon like this sickle sword here, this Mambele, and it's going to be very, very. It's going to tell you a lot about how it can be used. Now, there are some, now what you have to do is you have to like disconnect the martial arts mind, because in the martial arts mind, anything goes, right? Like, shit, I can use that thing to do all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But if we're talking about simple, I have my shield, you have your shield. How would I make this work with this combination in a very, very simple,
in the most efficient and most way.
Right.
Yeah.
You start coming upon the framework of a plausible reconstruction. And of course, what's important with this is always exercising the intellectual honesty to say, like, you know, what you're referencing and how you're coming across your conclusion. And you can't ever say this is conclusively how they fought. What I'm doing is, like, I'm really enjoying the journey of my discovery, right? So the weapons tell us a lot. The art tells us a lot. Their defensive equipment tells us a lot. In certain areas, we go by accounts. So
that kind of leads to my next question for you, Da'Mon. So there's all these different sources, all these ways that people gather this data. And HAMA is a lot newer and less established than like HAMA is right now, or a lot of the other armored combat clubs and SCA, for example.
Right.
So if I'm a brand new guy and I'm like, HAMA's really cool, how do I jump in that? How do I, like, where do I start?
Good question. Okay, the best place to start, what I call like HAMA fundamentals, right? Baseline things that you can learn that will, one, connect you with living traditions that are still practiced in Africa and practiced in the African diaspora. From there, those practices will actually help prep and prepare you for more of the complex reconstruction. So say like you ultimately wanted to like learn, you know, like you wanted to reconstruct like Egyptian like shield and weapon work, right? So shield and sword, shield and spear work, right? What I would recommend a person start with is, I would say, you know what, you want to learn stick and shield, you want to learn how to, you want to reconstruct Egyptian shield work. I would say on a physical level, start learning as much as you can about living traditions that practice and still use a shield. So that would be like Nguni stick fighting. That would be some of the various stick fighting styles that are practiced in East Africa. And that way, not saying that the things are the same, but from a tech position, they are working with the same fundamental material. You know what I'm saying? They're working with the same fundamental material, and they're working under similar defensive equipment. So the Egyptians had some kind of armor, but they weren't heavily armored, you know, and they were mostly depicted as wearing as their shield as being their primary form of body armor, right? And that's very common with you know, Nguni warriors, the Zulu warriors, right? So you can learn how to get used to using stick and shield, or by doing Nguni stick fighting. And so then from there, once you have a skill set in that ability, now when you start to do, like, you know, when you start saying, okay, let's look at Egyptian, let's say I'll say axe and shield just to get away from sword stuff. So what I could do is I could use my knowledge of Nguni stick fighting to help inform my reconstruction of Egyptian axe and shield. So I'm using a living tradition to help build a primary skill set that makes my reconstruction more plausible, because I have a skill in that particular type of system. Because, you know, Egyptian shields are center grip like most African shields, and their use and manipulation wouldn't have been terribly different. You have roughly the same amount of body coverage from an Egyptian shield than you would have. So the Nguni stick shield is a lot larger, but then the idea is, how do I get around the shield? They're made out of the same material, made out of hide, and in some cases possibly reinforced wood with hide covering. But for the most part, you're talking about a very light shield with a center grip and an edge and impact weapon. So you're looking at some of the same movement patterns, the same basic movement patterns.
Where it's about inspiration. And as we close on this last part, which has been a great time talking to you, we really appreciate the time and opportunity you've given to it. But that also goes to a big point. Me being in Illinois, Doug being in California, Kyle being in, where are you now? You're
right now I'm in Michigan, but only for a little while. I've got a horse thing this weekend.
That's all right. It's awesome. And then yourself being in Austin, Texas, we really appreciate the chance. So closing on this, I know that, I mean, honestly, I'm just not beating around the bush. As far as the HAMA community, historical African martial arts, and African community, we just had the passing of Chadwick Boseman. So as far as the Black Panther, and sometimes that was, I know for myself, that was my first introduction to Black Panther or historical martial arts in the venue that they showed it. So that was a really big inspiration that I wanted to see. And I'm not going to lie, I was hoping to one day reach the level of expert or expertise through tutelage in yourself and learning my own things, where one day maybe meet this individual and be like, thank you for doing all the things you did. And this is what drove me to want to be so higher. And now he's gone. And it's that whole thing. It's giving rose to someone that inspires you. What is something that inspired you to want to do HAMA? And what do you think about all this right now?
So it's always tough. It's tough when someone, goes before their time, you feel, you know what I'm saying? Like it's like they say the life of a samurai is like the blossoming of the sakura blossom, of the cherry blossom. It's brilliant and beautiful, but it's short-lived. And I kind of feel that's that way. With Chadwick Boseman, it's like I've seen a number of his movies, prior to Black Panther, and I wasn't really a big comic book reader when I was younger, and so I got introduced to Black Panther a lot older, when I was more of an adult. But it's like that from my childhood, I know from firsthand experience what it means and what it feels like. One, what it feels like to not have that person to show you that this is a possibility, to make you think about things beyond like what you see. At the time, what you see, it could be things that make you feel terrible, or things that drag you down and that weigh you down and make you feel like you should hate yourself, that you do hate yourself. And I know, like I said, speaking as from my experience, that's where I was at. And there were very few examples of that inspired me to that I could look like me to do what I'm, to be honest. So to have someone like now, in our time, 2018, 2020, to have someone like finally play that role, that African being, that person that embodied, not just the physicality of being a warrior, but also was a scholar and was honorable and well educated and balanced all these things and compassionate, and having that image now is like I don't think that we can really know the impact that's had. Like, it's had a tremendous impact in our lives, in the lives of our children, those of us who have children. It's impacted us in a very profound way that we probably will be thinking about and talking about for years. So as I feel really sad with his passing, and my heart goes out to his family, I'm really grateful for his life, and for the circumstances that allowed him to play this character, to create this character, to bring this character to life so that he can inspire, young boys and girls and everything else with this character. So I'm grateful for the work and for the life of Chadwick Boseman. I mourn his passing. I celebrate his life. I celebrate the life he brought to the role and the idea that as people of African descent, we're not normally seen as being interested in like sci-fi and in fantasy. And yes. I think that a lot of times that's linked to us being people who have had our roots severed, our ideas of our past completely severed, and our ideas of the present or the future completely unknown to us. So in this survival mode in the present. And I think that what we need, what's important for us to develop for ourselves is to connect back with our roots so that we understand where we came from, and then see those roots and our present being manifested in our future, not just our future, but in our children's future, their future's future. And I think that, having roles and having images like that, it helps feed that imagination. Because if you think about quite a few of our technological advances, quite a few of those things were prophesized by like sci-fi fantasy.
Oh, yes. Like Star Trek and the tricorders and the other things. Like, why are this cell phone's never going to come out? And here we have cell phones. And
right, like the watch and comic books from Dick Tracy. I watch.
Yep.
Right, exactly. So, and then also these mediums have also been very useful to deal with very sensitive subject matters that may be too close to home to deal with in a very concrete way, but then it's like we can step back from it and look at it from a different perspective and get the bigger picture. So again, the fact that this production happened and that this character was brought to life, it's like you don't have to put your head down when you think about. And granted, T'Challa is a fictional character,
sure,
but the idea, he represents factual truth in that there were, kings and queens and warriors and generals and scholars and healers that, just like anywhere else, came from the many different parts of Africa, and they all had, a story to tell and a lesson to give, and they're just as important. Sundiata is just as important as King Arthur, and we can enjoy both of those stories and then say, hey, you have King Arthur, I have Sundiata, and we can share stories and both rejoice in those things. So I think that's a powerful thing, and we're going to be talking about that impact for a very long time.
Many years to come. And I think it helps us, especially in the troubling world that we are. Obviously we all don't look alike. It's nice to have something that looks like me, but then when I talk to my other friends like such that are Caucasian, Kyle, when we talk about other mythos, the most important thing that brings us together is swords. It brings martial arts and it helped us bridge that gap. And be it female, male, anything, it was really cool what that movie and what portrayed, but also I think going forward it allowed us to educate each other, to be like, oh, I didn't know that. Or, there's something else to learn. Let's go learn about it together.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm just lucky that I have my three brothers here, as well as we're like, hey, let's go do this. And then we'll each follow each other's interest and go bother you and be like, teach us some sickle sword stuff and other things. And we'll be knocking on your door and they'll be like, go away for right now. It's late. But we'll be like, hey, we'll learn.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I had no knowledge of HAMA at all, even as a concept before Spencer introduced it to me. And he's like, you got to check this out. This is really cool. And I'm like, you've never lied to me about swords yet. I have no reason to doubt you on HAMA. And like, we had our first lesson. I'm like, oh man. And then like, we talked about like some of your footwork and flow drills. And he's like, there's this guy, Da'Mon, you got to check him out. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, some of this is very familiar to me. Some of it's different, but like, but I love it. It's taking swords and it's applying it to the situations. Yeah. And it was, I remember actually, Spencer, like as soon as we started that very first lesson, I was like, do we do the Black Panther salute? Is there like a cool salute? Come on. And you're like, yes, we can.
I'm like, we can do it anyway. And I thought about in Da'Mon's head, he's like, when he told me we had to talk and all this to get back to your story before, I'm like, how do I get started? He's like, just do it. And I was like, that sounds scary. I need to like be told what, because you want that validation. But after you're like, can we do Black Panther salute? And this was like, what, 3 months ago? I'm like, yes, let's do it. And then we get started. So you're building your own culture, and it was really cool. But go ahead, Kyle. Sorry, that was awesome.
No, that's it. I'm just saying, like, it was really cool that I got introduced to it because it's not something I might have investigated on my own because I've got so much of a history of studying Asian martial arts and European martial arts that to study another one is just difficult in general. But when you present it to me, I'm like, well, that's kind of cool. I get to use a Shotel. Heck yeah, man. Like, I've actually always kind of wanted to use one. And I never really thought about it until you put one in my hand. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I've wanted to use one of these since I was like 6 years old. And I first saw it in a museum book. Like, this is cool.
Yeah, that's good. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been the same for me to watch you guys right before COVID kicked off at like our last retreat that I was unable to get out to, but it made, the yearning to do this even more. And now after talking to you, keeping that excitement of, I can't wait to, get to the battle royales and competition and celebrate and share culture and sit down with you and meet and go to Battleground and meet you and swing sword and celebrate. Celebrate this.
Well, there's definitely going to be a battleground in Chi-Town eventually, and I think it's going to be good. But we really appreciate your time. And actually, for you, as we close, is there anything you want us to promote for you, or is there any other things that we can help share knowledge about? Because I know you guys are always working on something.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and my brain is like Swiss cheese. I'm probably embarrassing my organization right now.
You got a lot of stuff going on.
Exactly what to say. We've been doing recently these interviews called HAMA Live. The president also has been doing a number of subjects. So get a chance, check that out. So it's a good little interview session. Had quite a few people on. What we're doing mainly is like working on that manual, getting that translated. Should be out soon. It is a very difficult task. Translating classical Arabic into a functional English translation. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We've been working on that. That should be coming out soon. I'm also working on a few source book and manuals for Egyptian martial arts and for Shotel and the Guradi, and then our North African and Tuareg sword. So three possible fight manuals that I'm working on right now.
Standing.
It's scary.
Yeah. It's a lot of unknown. It's a lot of things to produce, but you can do it. And as we talked about before,
exciting.
As much as you don't want to hear it, you are definitely the de facto expert in North America, and they're almost the world on a lot of the historical African martial arts stuff. So
that helps me to rest very easy at night.
It better. I know that was sarcasm, but it's the truth. Man. And it's anything you talk about where you've put in the time, you put in the work, you've learned all these things. As we've all looked there, you're able to not ramble. You're able to eloquently state the history of all these things. And I'm just like, I'm going to have to watch this later and write this down because I've already can't remember all of it. So
guess what I'm going to be doing at 5 o'clock in the morning after this conversation?
Training.
Exactly.
Yes.
I'm going to be training and reading.
Let's
All right.
To make sure that I never fall short of that, I'm going to be training and reading.
We'll make sure to get some sleep. Sleep is important too.
We're gonna hold you to that. We're gonna check on you on social media.
Okay.
Like it's 5:10. Is he up yet? Is he doing it?
All right. Thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And cut. Thanks for tuning in today. Once again, thanks to our patrons. Shout out to our top patrons: Ajax Dragonfuhrer, Cedo Sama, and Byron Swanson, Pathfinders of the Wandering Sword. And remember, if you like what you see, like, comment, and subscribe. Wander on.